For those of us who were at yesterday's panel on the future of the Republican Party, I have to say that Michael Kramer and Brent Stevens set a very high standard. That was a fascinating, fabulous exchange, and we may not equal them intellectually, but we're going to have more fun and be more provocative because we're Democrats.
Thanks for that endorsement.
I say no to that.
And as I said this morning, it may seem a little odd to talk about the future of the Democratic Party with two fellows from a very Republican state, Louisiana. But after all, Louisiana, as I said, has gone 3 times in the last 40 years for Democratic candidates for president. It happened both to be Southern governors. 3 of the 5 times we've done it. So maybe there's something to learn from that, but also as to the kind of voters we have to win back. I couldn't be happy to be on a platform with Mitch Landrieu and Charles Blow. Mitchell I've known since he was 15 because for me, Mayor Landrieu is his dad. Moon Landrieu was one of the great American public servants of the last century, Moon and Verna, and so Mitchell has carried that forward. And so I'd be remorseful not to pay tribute to his roots. And when you buy his book outside and read it, you will find out all about Moon and Verna and their 9 kids, all of whose names begin with M. And
That's right.
Mitchell only has 5, and I think Moon and Verna now have 38 grandchildren?
Yeah.
38, okay. But and Mitchell, of course, is celebrated now for taking down Confederate monuments. Charles's bio and book, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, is tonally incredibly different, but equally fascinating and compelling. A very, very different story, going from small town to Grambling, and then started in the graphics field to end up being an extraordinary columnist, provocative columnist for the Times and commentator on television. And so we're just going to talk a little bit first about what I think are some of the prevailing myths that are going on. I would say the question I've been asked the most in the last year about the party is desperate anxiety of people to say, how can we possibly win if we don't have a single message, a single program? What are we going to run on? The evidence being, we need a Newt Gingrich contract with America. And so I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Thank you, Charles.
And I'm talking about, let's talk first, we're talking short term first about 2018 and the election that's 3 months from now.
Well, first of all, Jay, thank you. It's nice to see you. Charles, if you can only buy one book, buy Charles's book. It's better than mine.
Everybody here can buy 2 books.
Oh, good. Well,
no one book deal.
I don't know how much change y'all have in your pocket, but if y'all are strapped a little bit, just buy his. First of all, my wife Cheryl's with me. It's great to have her, and it's great to be here, and to Ben and Donna Rosen and to the whole Kent family. Thank you. I'm going to just preface everything that I say today with a couple of things that should dismiss me off of the stage immediately, which is I have no idea. That's the answer, so we can leave now, about what's going to happen, because we're in an environment that we have never been in before. All of the rules of engagement that used to be true are not true anymore. And that's true from a process point of view, and it's true from a messaging point of view. I think the rise and the election of President Trump and his view of what it means to be a conservative and a Republican are completely different with everybody that went before them. It is creating tectonic shifts, the consequences of which are not clear to us, and you should never run the last election. And so all bets are off, nobody really knows, and we're for the most part all guessing. So that's caveat 1. Caveat 2 is I don't speak for the National Democratic Party. I'm a local elected official. I was a lieutenant governor of a state that used to be blue that is now red.
It is possible that you could begin to speak for the Democratic Party.
Maybe, or not.
I'm trying to get this out of him.
My viewpoint is we're kind of down looking up, not up looking down. Having said that, I would make a couple of observations. The way we hold things in our mind wants to force us to say, what's the National Democratic Party saying? What's the Republican Party going to say? As though that represents what most of Americans think. And that's not true either. And the fourth thing that's is, I think, worth knowing as y'all think about 2018 and 2020 is whether or not this election really is about, is it the economy, stupid? Is it about tax cuts? Is it about health care? Is it about cybersecurity? Or is it about something much deeper? I happen to think this next election, where the country is right now, is really just about democracy and liberty. And it's not really about whether you're a conservative or a liberal. We're in a whole nother space in this country, and I feel like, without making you more scared than you should be, that we're at a point where we all have to make a decision about whether we can put our ideology down and actually save the country at a time of what I think is imminent peril. And that is a time that threatens democracy and liberty and the institutional structure that has kept the United States of America strong. And my strong suggestion is that we look beyond party and we look over party and we put country first and we do whatever is necessary to rebalance the power in this country so that we get ourselves back to a normal place where we can then have that wonderful family fight about whether you want to tilt to the left, the right, or to the middle. And so that's the context of most of the discussions that I'm having. I don't really have knowledge right now of this kind of intra-party fight that the Democrats are having right now, which is broadly seen as, are we tilting to the left to become a social democracy? I don't think that's going to happen. Or do the mainstream Democrats have a fight as though those were the only two options that exist? And I don't think that's true either. And I think as 2018 plays out, some of the primaries have indicated that the mainstream Democrats are holding against the incursion, but I think they have a lot more in common, and as well with independents and Republicans, than the far right of the Republican Party that's being run by Trump. And that's really kind of the view that's going to decide what the new message is for whoever's running or whatever's running, and whether they're congressional or whether they're presidential candidates.
I think maybe I have I don't know if it's a more pessimistic view or not, but a different one, which is that people have seen, there was already an energy around a distrust and disdain for institutionalism broadly. And this election in 2016 only fueled that because people said, they have broken it to the right, why can't we break it to the left? Meaning, if someone can survive destroying all the institutional pillars, we can do it for the good. And there's a lot of energy around that idea. I believe that you're right. Nate Silver did this analysis of whether or not the insurgents were winning against the establishment. The establishment was winning something like 89% of the time. But they're winning by having to acknowledge and adjust course to fend off these insurgents because the message is resonant. That is where all the young energy, a lot of the young energy is. The establishment candidates, the establishment wing of the party has not done a good job of building a deep bench, so a lot of them are very old. And the young candidates are more to their left. And that imbalance has to be rectified. I actually think that to the degree that there is some internal squabble, that it's healthy.
I agree.
I think that the establishment got lazy, and they weren't, and they were in some ways beholden to institutions and to big money and big power, and they kind of coddled that, and it coddled them back, and there were, that Occupy Wall Street thing was not a policy shifter, but it was a narrative shifter. And these little movements that keep popping up, I shouldn't say little, they're not inconsequential, but all of them, Black Lives Matter, they're all about the same thing, that there is a power structure that has failed us, and that the Democrats, no politicians have saved us from this. And that we have to save ourselves from it by breaking the thing. And somehow or another, Democrats have to get their arms around this thing because it is not going away. Those young people are, they didn't just vanish with Bernie Sanders. No, they're still there. And they're still ticked off. And they are the legs. They're the young legs.
So let me break that down in a couple things. First, point you made, I think that these conflicts within the party, the primaries, are that many of us worry about. They consume a lot of energy and a lot of money. You get 14 candidates, in some places 9. You said it's positive. Do the three of us agree that at the end of the day, that's going to be positive for the party? It's going to bring in new people, create energy, whether it moves people to the left or not. So far, the evidence is it is not changing dramatically who the candidates are, but the process seems to be positive.
I think it makes them stronger.
Yeah. A couple things. Charles and I'm actually in complete agreement with you about this. But I don't, again, if I could ask you to look at it from a different perspective, we're talking about the future of the Democratic Party. Y'all had one about the Republicans. I'm asking, and you talked about Occupy Wall Street. So we're talking now as though here it's a straight line, and the Democrats are over here, and this is the 50% part, and the Republicans over here, and the Tea Party's over here, and the Occupy Wall Street people are over here, as though the race is to the middle. I would ask you to think about it differently. I think the election of Donald Trump was a primal scream that from people in America who felt disenfranchised, not seen, and not heard. Now, you can ascribe value or judgment to whether it was the white working class folks in coal country that were called, deplorables, or whether it was the Occupy Wall Street. But if you step back for a second historically and think about it writ large, you might want to think about this as a circle rather than a line, and ask yourself how far the Tea Party people are emotionally away from the Occupy Wall Street people. I happen to think in the circle, one of them is at 11:59 and one of them is at 12:01. That's what I sense. And they have been appropriately manipulated or spoken to or juiced up to convince them that they're enemies of each other. And somebody figured out that if you separate them by race, creed, color, sexual orientation, nation of origin, and make them afraid of each other, the people who are basically working class folks in this country won't find each other. I think they will. Or if they do, it's going to create a whole nother thing. And I think that President Trump actually is in the process of purposefully doing this. His gambit is 50% plus one wins. I don't need to build a consensus. I think that's completely wrong for the country, but that's what he's doing, and he's won up to this point. And so as the Democrats think about this, when we run, all of a sudden, we run in a completely different world. Just the Democrats over here, the Republicans over here, you guys have a fight, and hopefully y'all will nominate somebody that can then go back to the center. That's just process. That's not to say, though, ideologically, this pent-up frustration and anger with the institutions of government and business to improve the lives of normal citizens is not working in America. You can sit here and listen to us talk about cities, cybersecurity, all the kind of things about the internet. Those are the kinds of things that affect people on the ground. What the talk is in Washington, D.C. every day has little or no impact directly every day, and people are frustrated about that because they want the infrastructure rebuilt. They want to make sure that they're not excluded from health care for pre-existing conditions. They want to be able to make sure that they and their families have a better life than everybody else and access to a job. Even though the economic numbers are up, the wage gap has not really closed, although it starts to, and there's a lot of anxiety in America, and nobody thinks the country's listening to them, and that's going to manifest itself somehow. And right now it's manifesting itself this way and this way, but eventually that's going to come back together. The reason I said I don't know is because we haven't been here before, like not in my life, maybe many years ago. But it's important to recognize that this is a pivotal moment and a dangerous moment. It requires attention, and it's going to force us to think about life very, very differently, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to manifest itself. I believe that the Democratic Party is much better off having an open, robust competition where everybody is invited to the table. I think that we need to be an open party, not a closed party. I think the more diverse we are, the more we think about the future, the more inviting we are, the better we're going to be, because essentially I believe that America is an idea that diversity is a strength. It's not a weakness. And I do believe that we are a nation of immigrants. We have always been a nation of immigrants. It's true that we're a nation of laws, but that's a process issue. Soulfully, we have always been a nation that is open and inviting and not closing. And I'm from the city of New Orleans. Don't any of my people from New Orleans kill me here. But in New Orleans, what you have noticed in the South, every organization that I know of in my life that has closed off their membership, that has become more narrow, that has turned into itself, has atrophied. Every one of them. I don't know one of them that has actually gotten bigger, better, open, made more money, created more things, found more value and more beauty. I haven't seen it. And that's what the country's kind of trying to do right now. It's completely wrong. And so I think once we get past all this party stuff and we start thinking about country first, you know, and what it means to be an American as opposed to what it really means to be a Democrat or Republican, we're going to get ourselves to a better place. Although, I agree with Charles, I'm not ready to be the great optimist that I am naturally. I don't think this is a fait accompli. I think the country has decided to go in a different direction. I think it's the wrong direction. They could do it again. And I think that would be a terrible shame.
Can we just pin down, when you said open and diverse, can we just be clear that in some ways the big issue with the battle with the left within the party is about ideological purity? And the party's been through that a lot in the last 40 years, back to 72 in McGovern. And it appears right now that in 18, the party has put aside whatever the left is doing, but has generally put aside ideological purity. And that I think is the kind of diversity that's happening. Is that what you mean?
Well, forgive me, Charles. I would say two things. One of them is coaching how to win a game, and the other is the substance of what you're talking about. They're different. Policies are different from process. As a general matter, I think that you can't govern if you can't win. So you got to figure out how to win. And you need more votes than the other people. And so I think the more people you invite to the party, the better chance you have. I don't think the Democratic Party ought to be ideologically pure. I think we've gotten way too much that way. The Republican Party got that way before. And I think we need to be a big tent. We need to represent not just the Democratic Party, but the people in America that are not Democrats. You know, we've got this number that everybody loves Trump because 80% of the Republican Party loves Trump. Well, the problem is the people who self-describe as Republicans is getting smaller and smaller. So ask yourself the next question, think about it. Well, how many people actually is that? And when you add them all up, how many Americans actually is that? Well, it's less than a quarter. So what? He's got 90% of a quarter. What is that? That's a lot less. That's not a majority. It's anywhere close to it. So that whole middle, you know, where people self-identify, that they're not sacred to, there are a lot of Republicans and Democrats that could care less about what's behind their name when they vote for president. They want somebody that reflects the values of the country, or at least we thought they did. But we took a wrong turn, and we took a bad wrong turn. And that wrong turn needs to be corrected for the country. And I think that the Democrats would make a terrible mistake if they demanded ideological purity from any of the candidates. And you know what? I'd just say have a free-for-all. It's very healthy. Those debates are really great. It sharpens candidates up. The person who's going to be the nominee will come into focus over time, just like the Republicans did last time. I thought it was very instructive. It was weird that Trump just beat those guys to death. But it was very instructive that he and all of the dwarfs on the stage, 17 of them, you know, went through that process. It was good. That was a good exercise. It yielded a bad result. But the exercise was better than trying to, you know, use the process to keep it narrow rather than open.
What's the question?
I don't remember what the question was, but you gave a couple of answers to that. Well, of course, there is a lot of theory around that midterm elections are more about the incumbent president, there's a lot of evidence of that, than anything that the party does, and that whatever we do, unless the party was to shoot itself in the foot with insisting on intellectual purity and then driving out 20% of the possible candidates who could win, this is really going to be an election about Donald Trump. And it's interesting that in the key races, like Conor Lamb in Pennsylvania, where have been successful, the smart candidates don't seem to have to mention Donald Trump at all. Right. You don't have to tell anybody. If you don't like Donald Trump, you don't have to be told the problems. So what winning candidates are doing so far, and the Times had a terrific story about this yesterday, are being very local and very smart. And that's a very different pattern we've had. It occurred to me maybe we're blessed that the party seems to have a very weak national chairman, that we don't see much about Tom Perez. He's not trying to force anything. Maybe we want just a kind of anarchy within the party or mayhem, and let everybody go for themselves. We'll worry about governing after, as you say, Mitchell, but let 1,000 flowers bloom, and certainly anybody in Louisiana is going to be different than anybody in the Hudson Valley, New York.
Of course. However, but it doesn't matter that if the party has a strong message in the midterms. I don't think so. It matters a tremendous amount that the party has a message going into 2020.
And where does that come from?
I mean, that is Perez. That whatever that machine is doing now, it has to. Some people say it's asleep. I think they're actually working, but it has to have a message that rides alongside the candidates as they duke it out. But in addition to that, I think two things are happening in the midterms, which is that you mentioned. One is that they are being hyper-local. Makes sense. The second is that this is all about Donald Trump. And there are some similarities that draw those, the left and the right and the energy there together, but there's a huge, almost unbridgeable gap that is developing. The Democratic Party is growing more and more and more diverse, and the Republican Party is growing less and less and less diverse.
Amen.
And a quote from a guy in Brooklyn. He has a blog, but I love his blog. And he has this quote that I use all the time, and he says, "We can disagree and love each other until and unless our disagreement turns on your denial of my
Absolutely.
right to exist." And that is a huge difference. They may have, say, similar economic interests, but the moment that Donald Trump says that there's some good Nazis and his numbers go up,
Right.
it becomes very hard to figure out how I meet that person in the middle,
Correct.
right? When they lock kids in cages and his numbers go up among those people and they cheer him at a rally for doing it, it becomes very hard morally. Even if we are both in the same part of the country or city where the industrial base has collapsed and we both need to find a job and we both are struggling with the same problems, the fact that there is a denial of basic humanity in people is huge.
Correct.
It's huge.
So I want to stop here for a second, because this, in my opinion, is what this is what 2020 should be about, whether it is or not, or who runs or who doesn't. So because somebody said, oh, the economy's doing great, and James Carville said it's the economy, stupid. So since the stock market's gone up and the unemployment rate is down, the question that the country has to ask itself now is, what's the price that you're willing to pay to deny other people's humanity? There is no price that I'll pay for that. And so this is about Donald Trump, because he is a person he is exactly who he told you he is. He doesn't tell the truth. He told you he doesn't tell the truth. I mean, it's a way of living. When his lips are moving, he's lying. He just is. That's his way. I'm not trying to be pejorative. You've seen this already. This is an observation. He has already told you that he's going to judge people based on race, creed, color, sexual orientation. He already told you that he would separate. You all know that. That's his way of governing. That's what he's going to be. He's also told you he's tried to make a deal with you, especially people in this room, white people who have a little change in their pocket. Listen, this is good for you. Just forget about all that other stuff. This is good for you. Stock market's up, companies up, unemployment's down. You're making money that you never made before. It's better than it's ever been, forever. Forget about the fact that it's been 90 months of it, and you could argue about who's responsible for it. I'm going to give you a tax cut. I'm going to cut your corporate gains tax. You're going to make a lot of money. You're going to forget about this inequality thing, this income inequality, and this wage gap. I'm making a deal with you that everything's going to be good for you if you stick with me. And the question is, what's the price you're willing to pay? The price is too high. because he's asking you to close your eyes to the very idea of what makes America a great country, which is liberty and freedom and justice and mercy, those kinds of things. I happen to think this election is just about him. And yeah, the Democrats will find a message, but it's beat Trump. That's my message. It's real simple, beat Trump. You can fit it on a hat. You can make it red if you want. It's really important because that is essentially, I think, what the argument is about. Now, it's not normally about this. In a normal time, all of us Americans who self-identify as Republicans and Democrats could have this really interesting thing, like, here are the goalposts. We recognize everybody's humanity. We all have a great opportunity. We're not going to discriminate against anybody. We're not putting anybody in jail. We're not taking away security clearances because you disagree with me. I'm not going to be an autocrat. Let's argue about whether or not we ought to have tax cuts that are going to stimulate the economy or whether we ought to have investments in infrastructure. That's normal. I want to be really clear with everybody in here. We are not in a normal time. This is not normal. You shouldn't let it become normal. And it's not okay for the things that are going on in this country to happen right now, and everybody has to stand up and say it. And then we can argue later, when we get back into reasonable territory, what we're supposed to do. So I echo him. I love this man. This man, besides the fact that he's from Louisiana and went to Grambling, but what you're noticing on TV and what you're noticing on the ground is a pent-up frustration. And what these young people are telling us, and the strength of the advocacy, the passion of it, you should pay attention to. And because they're basically going to say, you know what, we're asking you for something that's really basic. This should not be hard. And if you're not going to give it to us, we're going to take it from you. That's really what they're saying. And you know what, they might. But the problem is it might be an extreme answer as opposed to one that we all can live with. And so the frustration that Charles has, and I have this too, when I pick up the paper and I see all the things that this administration is doing and I don't see my fellow Americans come with me, I start going, well, wait a minute. Maybe we do have to pick sides. Maybe we really are in tribes. Maybe we really do have to have a fight. And if we have to have a fight, we have to have a fight because it's worth fighting over. But you cannot concede the point. President Trump has already told you what he's going to do. He believes in peace through strength, right? You hear that through Ronald Reagan. That's not what Reagan meant. Reagan didn't mean it that way. What this guy means is I'm going to take everything that you have, that I want, that I have the power to take unless you stop me. Because that's the rule that I play by. And those are his rules. And he's the president. He's evidently making the rules. So this is like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When they had that knife fight. You remember when Butch walks in there and he got that giant and he says, you know, there are no rules in a knife fight? You know, the question we're going to have to ask is, do we abide by the normal rules of engagement or do we have a different kind of fight? And I don't think it's going to be clear because I don't think he's going to relent. And I think this election is all about Trump. 2018, 2020, both of them, because he's insisted that it be that way.
So I want to take two quick diversions before coming to 2020. One is just to test the notion of ideological purity and the left. Kristen Clark yesterday made a very compelling argument about Brett Kavanaugh, about both his candidacy on the merits and why we should be concerned, but particularly about the fact that the outrage and hypocrisy of having hearings in September when 13% of the documents have been made available, and it looks like Grassley and the committee don't really care about that. I'm assuming that at least 3 Democrats, if the vote is before the election, that at least 3 Democrats are going to, Senate Democrats, are going to vote for Kavanaugh. And the question is going to be, will the party or a big segment of the party drive them crazy? They're going to have a real hard time getting reelected anyhow, or do we all understand that we need those seats because we may never see those seats again in our lifetime? Got any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, the hearings for Supreme Court justices have become a joke anyway. This is not a real exercise. For the most part, whoever is nominated is going to be seated. That's the game.
It will only go to the timing because the documents can't be provided till after November.
He's going to be seated. That's the game. This is a joke, and we're pretending that there's some magical way, and they have to do it for political reasons to say that we're going to fight as hard as we can and do this and that. But you know, this is one of the elections have consequences moments, and they'll fight and they'll make a fuss, and he'll be seated. And those Democrats will do whatever they have to do to survive. Because they know also that he's going to be seated anyway.
So I'm gonna answer this. I agree with him 100%. I'm going to answer this question a little bit more broadly. Elections have consequences. And the way it works, and the way it's always worked, is that the president gets to nominate, and absent something just incredibly egregious when the Senate engages.
After Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell.
Hold the seat up.
Advice and consent, then it's going to happen. I think that what Mitch McConnell and the Republicans did to President Obama is unconscionable. I think the election debacle of the Supreme Court in 2000 was unconscionable. I think the Republicans that are running that show have decided they're going to do anything they can to get what they want, and they have succeeded thus far. And the elections have consequences. Had I been president of the United States, I obviously wouldn't have nominated Judge Kavanaugh to go to the Supreme Court. I don't think he reflects the breadth of what is important in America. But I agree with Charles. He is going to get confirmed. This is really just a political question of whether or not the Democrats are going to force 3 Democratic senators, all of whom have been fairly good Democrats, really good, Heidi Heitkamp, I think Joe Donnelly, and Joe Manchin, to fall on their sword for what? And if they don't do it, they're going to get punished. And if they do it, they're going to get punished. I think the long play, I'm just now quarterbacking here from the sidelines, just strategy. The smarter long-term play for these folks is to do their job, to make sure there is a robust hearing, although I agree with you that they've become more of a reality show, and make sure that the country understands the importance of the decisions that the Supreme Court's about to make, and then have to struggle with the very difficult question that a sitting Senate, do I give up my seat for something that's going to happen, or do I maintain the opportunity for the Democrats to take control so that the next generation of Supreme Court appointees are in a better shape? I don't envy those folks. It's a really tough position. I know 2 of those senators really, really well, and I think they're both wonderful people, and they've tried really, really hard. They're in a tough place. I'm sure they'll do what they think is the best thing for the country. I don't, as the party, though, if I were the chairman of the party, I would not demand, a certain thing, and even if you did, the chairman of the Democratic Party doesn't have any power anyway.
And also remember that there are more radical steps to take.
Correct.
We tried not to talk about radical steps, but the Constitution does not establish how many justices there must be on the Supreme Court. And in fact, it has fluctuated, it has been up, it has been down. The radical position is you gain enough control, you change the number.
Look, I struggle.
It has happened. It has happened.
I'm sitting here struggling because I've been doing this for 30 years, and my brain takes me to take my passion and my views and my policy and cure them into a governing philosophy that goes down to the ground, that affects people, that can be sustained over time. That's kind of what I've learned, because you got to make government work. It's important to be passionate. However, I have to say that there's a little part of my brain that's going, well, you know what? Hell, let's kind of throw down, and let's see where this takes us. They have done it. We've done it. I'm not recommending that. But all of a sudden, I'm starting to think, well, you know what? What really is the answer to this abuse that has been practiced upon this process for a long, long time? And how does the United States Senate become a governing body again? Like, for example, to take it outside of this issue to make it a little bit easier. Everybody in here believes that the roads are really kind of bad in the country, right? The bridges, the airports, the sewer and water systems. We have a major infrastructure deficit. One of the most important things we could do, like tomorrow, is massive investments like we did during the Eisenhower administration. And President Trump ran on this, but of course they haven't gotten anything done. 85 to 90% of the people in the country agree on this, and yet Congress can't pass an infrastructure bill. That means Washington's broken. That's why people in America really hate Washington. That's like the easy one. When you start talking about immigration, I happen to believe right now, Jay, that if Paul Ryan, before he left, gave a gift to the country and did something really simple, walked into the House of Representatives Monday morning and said, you know what, I'm going to have an exercise in democracy. We're going to do something we've never done before. I'm actually going to ask all 435 congressmen to come to work and sit in their desk at the same time. And he went up to the front and said, I, Speaker, ordained that in the next 5 days, and he could do this because he's the boss, that we are going to have an open debate on the House floor. We're not going to invoke the Hastert rule. An open debate. This is what you think they do. They don't do this. 435 of them sitting at a desk, an open debate for 5 days, 40 hours of debate, any amendments, and the issue is immigration reform, and they let everybody vote. All Democrats and Republicans, the ones we have right now that we say hate each other, I'll bet you a lot of money that they would come up with a comprehensive immigration reform bill that 65% of Americans agree with.
Yeah,
they won't do that.
But the real power in the Republican Party doesn't want that, and
That's correct.
That is the Koch brothers. There's real power behind these guys squabbling and yes-manning to the president that's playing a very long game.
That's
right?
correct.
That long game says these numbers do not look good for us. The demographics do not look good for us. And we have to figure out ways to lock in legacy power when we no longer have the majority of numbers. And they are playing that is what the Supreme Court justices are about. That's what pushing through all these federal judges is about. That's why every Supreme Court justice you see now is 40 years old, because they're trying to lock in legacy power for the next 2 generations. That is what all of this voter ID nonsense is about. That is why we will never get to comprehensive immigration reform, because they don't want to find any pathway to make it possible for those people to vote. Because in 30 years, Hispanics will be the majority not just majority-minority situation, but the majority population in 5 of the southwestern states, right? This is not, people are looking at this map, looking at these numbers and saying, this does not look good for us. And so when I say, like, you have to think radically, they are thinking radically.
We want to go to questions, if you can bring the mics down. And one last, I'm going to skip my Nancy Pelosi question, which is too bad because it's fun. Do that privately. And just to set the stage, can't resist asking the 2020 question. It's the first time in my life that I felt compelled to make a list of Democratic candidates, because there isn't the obvious group of 8 to 10 or 12 governors and senators who've been running for a while. And my number is now 45 people who have been named or named themselves so far. One of them sitting up here with us, and it ain't Charles. Maybe it should be. Maybe it should be. But
I didn't name myself.
But we'll ask you the money question, because Leslie will get you if I don't. So in a second,
you want me to answer it?
Well, go ahead, answer the question.
Are you going to run for president? No. Does that mean you're never going to run? No, you never say never. Well, what does that really mean? It means I'm probably not going to run. But that means you're going to run? Right? So let me do this. I've been doing this for 30 years. I just got finished being the mayor of a great city. I do think that a mayor, that job, running a city, is more akin to being the president of the United States than a governor or a senator, and it's a shame that more mayors have not ascended to the presidency, and there are lots of reasons for it, but the jobs, other than the war and peace part, are much, much more similar. I don't intend to run in 2020. In politics, you never say never. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not forming a committee. I'm not working on it. I've been, humbled by people mentioning my name, because it's an honor and it really makes you feel good, to be honest with you. But I don't intend to do that. I also think that there are a lot of really good candidates out there. I don't subscribe to this thing that the Democratic Party's lost in the wilderness, that they can't figure it out. They'll get it figured out. There are a lot of great candidates that are running, and a lot of them can beat President Trump. And I think the election will be primarily about him, who he is, what his governing philosophy is, and whether or not the country's headed in the right direction.
Let me just mention one thing that
Mike Bloomberg certainly agrees with his theory about mayors.
He's one of the guys that may run, and he'd be great.
No,
but go ahead, Charles. I cut you
off.
This is the party fighting.
But so, in case Mitch decided to run, one thing that would work in his
should be a good-looking ball-headed man, whoever runs.
Well, I mean, the Democratic primary swings south so quickly that people who do not have a way of relating to that population if you don't pick up those states in the beginning, it's hard to overcome that deficit. And Hillary Clinton's campaign recognized that. And what you have to understand is you're basically talking to older black women. You know, in some of those states, presidential politics, well, politics in general, have become so racialized in the South that Democrat becomes synonymous with black, and Republican becomes synonymous with whiteness. And when you swing south, you have to have a relationship, name recognition, some way of speaking to that population, because that is the one time during the cycle when they are truly powerful, because during the general, they will be swamped by Republicans, and those will be red states. But during the primaries, they are powerful, and they know it. And you have to be able to speak to that population. And people keep good candidates running into that, thinking that this thing that I'm selling in the liberal Northeast is going to work there, and it's not. Socially, there is almost no difference on social issues between black Democrats and Republicans. Almost none. So it doesn't quite play. It's a different language you speak. And somebody knows, I think, how to speak that language.
That's a profoundly important point, but it's not just the South. I think you could look at Bernie and maybe Elizabeth and say the ability to speak to minorities generally in the South and generally, you're not going to be the Democratic candidate unless you understand that and communicate and motivate those people to come out to vote.
Right. Let me address two issues. One, I don't want it to pass because Charles and I are soulmates in this regard. This fear that supposedly white America has about the fact that in 2040 and 2050 we're going to be majority minority, and oh my God, when they take over, it's going to be bad for us. Don't be afraid of that. Don't listen to that. We are a nation of immigrants. There are very few people in here that would follow the pure test. You wouldn't pass it, and you don't have to worry about the country becoming minority majority. They're going to treat us a lot better than we treated them. I want you to put this fear down, because that's the thing that they're trying to scare the hell out of you about. And you don't have to worry about. This country has always found a way through assimilation. I could take you into the city of New Orleans right now and take you on Josephine and St. Mary Street. There are two Catholic churches. This one the Irish went to. This one the Italians went to. They didn't even go to church together on Sunday. And now all my friends who are white, that are Italian and Irish, that are rich, are all conservative Republicans. And they love each other, and they act like they came from the same place. Don't forget that. This country is going to be fine. And do not let that fear that these folks are putting in you capture you. And when you can speak against it in the circles that you run in, speak against it. And for your friends that are afraid, say no. So don't worry about that. It's something that you have to address, though, because as Charles said, it is in a very frightening way taking more root in this country than it should have. And any notion of white supremacy, any notion of privilege in that regard is going to produce a backlash that is going to be bad for this country. So if you don't play into that, not that anybody would, I'm not judging anybody here, but I'm saying this because it's a primarily majority audience here, don't listen to that kind of stuff. That's the first thing that I would say.
And the rhetoric is completely ahistorical,
it's wrong.
When he says they're not sending their best, they're sending criminals. I mean, do you not remember that England was sending boatloads of prisoners to the colonies? I don't understand. I mean, the only reason that they set up the penal colonies in Australia was because of the rebellion here. I mean, people in this room are probably descended from criminals.
Well, I am.
What does that mean?
I am so.
Okay, first question, please. Identify yourself.
Hello.
I don't know. We're going to ask everybody that question at the end. Are you descended from Kriegel? Yes, sir.
Don't raise your hand.
My question is primarily about strategic timing for the Democratic Party. Do we have enough time to pull together within our party and show up for Donald Trump's reelection? And if not, how much would his second term hurt us? Would it be a grave for the Democratic Party?
I just think there's a tremendous amount of energy so that people are going to show up. I mean, the problem in 2016 wasn't necessarily that there was some giant wave of people coming out to support him. There were people who stayed home and did not vote. And Michael Moore, I hate to keep repeating this because I have not checked this number because he said it on television, but that in Michigan, something like the number of people who showed up and voted but did not vote for the presidential line was more than the number of people that Trump won by. There were people who were having a problem, maybe because of propaganda, maybe because of Russian meddling, maybe because of YouTube clips of Clinton saying super predator, whatever the reasons were. There were people who bought into this idea that that this was an election about lesser of two evils, and morally I can't participate in that sort of thing. And that was happening at the same time that the polling prediction people were saying, oh, you don't really have to worry about it anyway, 'cause she's going to win anyway, so now you can take the moral stand. That's how people were thinking. That is gone. And I think it would be a mistake to downplay just how much resonance each individual problem that Trump has created is sticking with different segments of the society. Puerto Rico, in Florida, that's we don't talk about it much. It's not in the news as much, but that's big. And the Hispanic community, at least the kind of Florida Hispanic community, New York Hispanic community, are still incredibly angry that was allowed to happen, that he was dismissive about it, that he went down there and threw those paper towels, that it just everything about that was wrong, and they're holding a grudge. On the border with Mexico, putting those kids in those cages, I don't know. There are a lot of different constituencies that are mad about that. Not just Hispanic, but just everybody who's a parent. And the fact that there are still 500 of them who are not back with their parents and may not ever, I heard someone say, well, if we don't finally figure it out, then they'll go into foster care. What do you mean? You're taking these people's kids forever? They've deported them already? I mean, it's crazy. I think that each one of these things, the Nazi thing in Charlottesville, people are holding one thing. They're going to be single issue voters, but it'll be their issue. It'll be the people who are insane about gun control and him pretending that he was going to do something, or I'll take on the NRA, and now he's calling the NRA before he makes decisions. I don't think people let that go. And I think there will be a lot of single issue people showing up at the polls, incredibly energized and saying, I just cannot have this happen.
Can we get another question?
Yes, thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. I was really struck by when you were talking about increasing the number of judges on the Supreme Court. And so my question is actually about, remaking institutions. If you take a long view of history, America has not always existed. Congress hasn't always worked the way exactly.
We're running out of time, so we're going to do two quickly.
My question is about how do you know when it's time to remake institutions, and how do you go about that?
And can we get the second question? We'll do them both.
The title of this seminar was The Future of the Democratic Party, and I found it notable, I'm not being critical, but notable that no candidates or possible candidates were mentioned. So if you could possibly, in the small amount of time left, suggest some thoughts about possible candidates, I think that would be a good thing.
You want me to do it?
Sure.
Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, John Hickenlooper, Mike Bloomberg. Who did I miss? Charles. People that
Why do you
whose
keep
names
putting Mike Bloomberg?
Because he thought about running last time, and he's going to think about running this time. So you're talking about people whose names are out there. You said 42. There are a number
Mike
of other
Bloomberg will never win. Let me get that out of here. Everybody's head.
Buddy, hang on one second. Hang on a second. So they're probably about, and more people will manifest themselves over time. There are a couple of congressmen that have said that they were going to run. I think Eric Garcetti, who is a mayor of Los Angeles, has talked a lot about running. Pete Buttigieg, who's another young mayor from, is talking about running. But there will be there'll be 25 people at least that present themselves for the Democratic Party. And then, we'll see how that works out.
So quickly, we need one from the South. But on the, and Bloomberg will not survive the black voters in the South because he championed stop and frisk, even in the face of the massive damage that it was doing in New York City and stopping hundreds of thousands of young black and brown men every year, knowing that they were not doing anything wrong, knowing that it was destroying their lives. He will, and he defended it to the death. He will never be a Democratic presidential nominee. But on institutions, you know that it is time to alter institutions when the government no longer reflects the majority of the population, right? And in the moment we start to get into that space, and we're already there with the gerrymandering on the House side, where Democrats keep winning, casting more votes, but Republicans keep having more seats, right? So that system is broken. You're getting a slow-moving constitutional crisis with the Electoral College because we're set up to protect the small states. But as more and more people move to urban spaces, their votes get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And the people in the least populated states, their votes get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Right. And so there are a lot of things that we have to examine as a society because we're slowly getting to the point where the majority of the population is not kind of leading the governing and philosophy of the country.
We could do this we may just sit here and do this all day. You all have other things, but before we, I'm offering a package deal. If everybody would go next door for $40, you can get both books. And when we sell out, leave your name. Robin will send them to you. Thanks for coming.